All right, welcome back to the channel, and today is pretty exciting. We have the Zoom Livetrak L6, which has just shipped, and I just got mine today, and I have not even used this yet, but I'm going to go over the features of it, and then we're going to take a look at how it works as an audio interface on your computer. Now, this is the follow-up to the Zoom Livetrak L6, which has been really popular. It's certainly been a popular video on my channel. I did a review of this back earlier in the year, right after the NAMM show, and lots of views and interest in this. And I went into a lot of detail on that, including taking it apart. So you can catch up with that by checking out that video, and we'll make sure there's a convenient link there. But now Zoom has taken this to the next level, and they've addressed many of the features and requests, or I guess complaints, about the first one, while keeping the same basic form factor and the 32-bit float operation. So let's just open the box and take a look at it. Let's just take a look at the accessories right away. But this is a really minimal power adapter, but I suppose that's enough. We have the USB-C to USB-A cable that would also work with that adapter. And then the unit is here in this kind of fabric bag. It's definitely longer. There's a little bit of additional safety information and the typical things you'd find. This is not a manual. I suppose for the manual, you could use this QR code or just go to the Zoom website and you'll easily find that. So they call this the L6max, and they've kind of maxed out this form factor by adding, you can see right away that they've added additional inputs and they've added an additional output here. There's an additional submix button on here as well, and a screen is on here. And there is a little remove this film sticker on there. So I removed that. And the one thing I want to do right away is let's power it up. So I'm going to power it up from this power bank. And on these units, you can power them up from the side. You can also power them up from the top. And if you connect it to a computer or another device, you can power it up from the top. The side USB only works for power. It does not transfer data. So if I hit the button, we should see the light show. Not only do we see the light show, we do see this. It did say right away, it said no SD card. Now, I am under the impression that the SD card formatting is the same. So I'm going to take the SD card for my other one. I don't have any critical recordings on here. So I'm going to take it out. And this is a SanDisk Extreme 256 gigabyte. It's got a lot of capacity for such a tiny little unit. Let me take this out and we'll put this in here and just see what happens. If it does what I think it does, it should continue to work. We'll power this up again. We got the light show here, which is always cool. And we got a nice display on here. Now it's asking to set the day, month, and year. Now I've never used this, but it looks like we're going to increment to what we want to set. So the year is fine. Okay, now I can increment up through the months. It's November. And then we'll go to the date, and today is the 7th. So I hit this check mark, which puts me into the day mode. Now we can do things related to recording file management using this display. So now that I've got that set correctly, now I can also do the time of day here. So we'll put it on the hours. So it looks like this is in the 24-hour time mode. Okay. So I'll go to the date time set. I'm going to hit OK here. Now it's asking what kind of batteries I have. So this is the setup things that we previously needed to use for the app. So I'll just say alkaline for the battery type. I don't have any batteries in there, but if I did. So it says new card detected, tests the card. I'll say, okay, we'll do a quick test and then execute. This is really nice because these things here would require the app in the past. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the L6 Editor app. And of course, we will take a look at that, but it has been revised to version 2. And you'll need to download that to use with this, and it will now work with both devices. So the new version 2 will recognize this device or this one, and it's still running through that sound test. Results passed. So it passed that test. Okay, so the way this works is I hit menu, and here we have project, select, rename, copy. There's different recorder modes. There's things with the sound pad. So a lot of these things are right here on the front panel now to go in there. And right here is the bounce button. This allows us to do a mix down of what we've previously recorded to 2 tracks so they could continue to record and basically do sound on sound recording. So before I jump ahead and get too excited about all this stuff, let's just take a look at physically what we've got here and a little bit about how this works. Now it's organized with inputs where you've got these XLR combi jack type inputs where you can take 1/4 inch unbalanced or TRS microphone cables, 32-bit, so there's no gain controls. There is dual converters on here that allow it to pick the right range. In my previous testing, I had a little problem with that with certain kinds of microphones, so we will be testing to see how that works. But they've added something that was missing on here, which is high Z buttons on the first 2 inputs, where you could plug a guitar with a magnetic pickup directly into the unit. Otherwise, the first 2 channels are the same. And then we've got a whole extra set of 1/4 inch inputs on 2 more channels. You can select 48 volts in pairs here, and that's really nice. I mean, many budget type interfaces like this, you get all or nothing with 48. So at least they've got it in these pairs. Now, let me just go back and review a little bit about the way this thing works. There's only 1 knob per channel on here. And when you turn that knob, then you do whatever you have selected here in this column. So you can see right now it's on level. So to set the basic mix level for your whatever's coming into all these inputs, you do that right here. And then if you want to set the panning, then you hit this button, and then you've got, tip it up a little bit so you can see it. You can set panning left and right on each of these right there. And so this is kind of the interesting way it works. If you want to set the effect send, you do that here. If you want to set aux input or output, you do that here. So it's the same knob. You just select what you want to do right on here. And of course, the aux out level is coming out, one of these 2 things. So if you wanted to set a level for this aux out, you'd do it here, or this aux out here. These aux outs could be used to send off to an effects unit or to stage monitors, and they are in mono. So even if you have the stereo channels, those come out in mono. At least it did on the old one. That's kind of the way this thing works. And then whatever you're doing with that mix setup then winds up coming back to the main channel, which you can then dial in here, and you can add a main compressor right here. You have sound pads, which you can use to trigger background music. You could play backing tracks, or you could have sound effects for a show, a podcast type show. And then you've got 1/8 inch MIDI in and out right here. Now, one thing that's been changed on the USB, this is the top level USB that you connect to a computer. And I understand it that it will appear as 14 inputs to your digital audio workstation, and then it will have 2 stereo outputs. Now, the stereo outputs come back right here. So if you want to do computer playback, that will come right here into USB return 1, 2. It's flashing because I don't have any real computer connected at this point. So then instead of using these inputs, then you can play back here. And you actually have two of those. So you have outputs 1, 2, and 3, 4. Pretty common on a lot of mixers to have two of those. And that's a really nice feature. This seemed a little tight because you use up two of those here, and then you only really have these 4 inputs. By having 2 more inputs, I think it will give it a little more breathing room. One of the tests I want to do is see if I could use this as my everyday audio interface. As you know, if you watch the channel, I've been using the Onyx 12 as my main interface here in the studio area for quite a few months now, even though I have access to many other USB interfaces. But I just want to try the challenge of using this because I just think this is such a cool and interesting device. I really like to see these things presented in innovative and new ways. I'm going to just mention one thing it doesn't have. It doesn't have Bluetooth. So if you want to go in and out of this to bring in something like a remote caller, you would need to do it here, or you would need to do it by connecting to these inputs. But for a remote caller, it needs to be that kind of a bi-directional connection with mix minus. We didn't have that on this one, but it does have this here. So if you wanted to have a remote caller on a phone or something like that, it is possible to do this. I'm not exactly sure what the options are for that yet, but I do know that that is something that's been added. I'll talk a little bit about the outputs. If you want to connect to studio monitors, typically you're going to connect to the master output, and then that is controlled with all the knobs are the same size, but the red knob controls that level. I believe it also records the level or controls the level of the main mix. And then this is the compressor that you can add to that. So because it's controlling the main mix or the stream coming out of this thing, or the way it's going into the recorder, you don't necessarily have a separate level control for this, but you do have a separate level control here, or you could use the sub out here and set that to master, and now you have a level control from that. Even though this is on a TRS connection, it's not balanced, but I believe you could use this as an output into, say, control room monitors or something if you really wanted to separate that from this knob. The sub out has a separate mix, and you can use it with the headphones, so you can control the mix to headphones independently of the main mix, which is a new updated feature. Now, the effects appear to me to be the same as they were before. However, there is another setting here called AI noise reduction. This did not appear on here. What this does is applies a kind of a noise reduction, kind of like a sophisticated gate, where you tap this or you hold this to listen to the noise. And once it does that, in a moment of silence, it will use some AI algorithm to suppress background noise of the entire mix. So particularly useful for streaming the entire stereo mix. Of course, it might be useful in some kinds of shows, but I don't think that that's really the point of it. I will get into that a little bit later. Some of the more advanced features or the more specific features I might not do in this particular video, but we will get to all of these in the course of the next few weeks. Another really welcome feature that wasn't on the original are these pad switches right here. Because the fact this is 32-bit, there is no gain control on each channel to set the levels, and it's relying on the 32-bit float quality to be able to get enough range to fit in whatever it is you might hook up to it. But it was possible on here to, in an analog way, to overdrive these channels, and I ran into that when I was using this and really was looking for some way to control the gain. I guess I'm old school enough that I feel a little uncomfortable not having my own control over gain. Would have liked to seen those pads on all of these, particularly as well. But I'm glad to see that they put them in here. So you could pad this down if you're bringing in something that's particularly hot into one of these. These are ideal for connecting up your groove boxes or connecting up guitar processors and things like that. Because this thing is digital and there's a lot of programmable things on here, you can set up scenes to be able to kind of bring back an entire setup. And those scenes are on these buttons here, A, B, C, D. They were A, B, C in the previous unit. And so they've added one more scene to the, to the design on this one. As far as I know, the features related to the sound pads are the same on here. And then there is this button here, bounce, which is related to two different bounce modes. One would be to take all of the recordings from the multitrack and then bounce them to a stereo set of channels that you can then, overdub over. I don't know exactly how that works, but that's related to this button and the transport. And you'll see that that did not exist on the previous one as well. And then let's talk a little bit more about the way the inputs are arranged. The full mix of this winds up coming back to your computer on channels 1 and 2 on the input to your computer when you have this thing selected as your audio device. And so you'll get the stereo input, and then these follow. And so 1 winds up being channel 3 on the inputs to the computer, and so on. So you got 3, 4, 5, 6. I found that particularly confusing, but you have to just set up your presets correctly. In Studio One that I use a lot with this, it's pretty easy to create the setup, and then it's not confusing once you've got kind of your audio input set up with the correct names on it. And then when you get up to 5, 6, 7, 8, these are stereo. So you wind up with something like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and, like that. And so if you're in a system where you just see them all in a row as numbers, you might not be connected to exactly what you think. I'm going to disconnect this, and we'll take a look at the back. There's not a lot on the back. The construction, to me, looks to be just a bigger version that's almost identical to the previous one. You can open this up and put in alkaline batteries. You can put in lithium batteries, or you can put in nickel metal hydrate batteries. And then you can set the type of battery on the front or through the editor. And I'm not sure exactly what that does. Maybe those batteries have a little bit different voltages. When you connect up the Eurorack adapter, the kit is the same as it was for this one, because the adapter hooks into these connections here and here, and then the Eurorack power connector goes in on the side, and it's in 2 pieces. So that bracket goes onto each side. The point of it is that it's the same thing. You use the exact same Eurorack that you use with this. And when I just see it here, it appears to be a little bit thicker, but when I had them end to end, it's actually not. So yeah, if you want to have the ultimate setup, you've got both of them end to end. That looks really cool. So with that, we've gone over all the inputs, outputs, all the new features and capabilities. We're going to take a look at it on the computer next. Okay, so I'm back on the computer now and on the Mac, and like we typically do in these reviews, I've loaded the Mac Audio MIDI setup so I can show you how the Zoom L6max appears as an audio interface to your computer. And you can see right away that it appears as Zoom L6max here, and it says 14 ins and 4 outputs. And then on the inputs, you can see it presents itself as 14 channels. Now, channels 1 and 2 are going to be the main mix off of the unit, which is different from most units. And then channels 1 will start here at channel 3 and go up. So that's a little bit confusing, but once you get the hang of it, you'll understand. Now, the interface modes, this thing runs only at 48 kilohertz. And that is pretty much the standard these days for podcasting and recording. So it's probably not going to be a problem. But if you wanted those higher end or higher resolution, formats, then this isn't going to be the right unit for you in terms of the sample rate. Now, it does do 32-bit float, and that is really the preferred output for this thing and the preferred input. So I would set it like that. It does have 24-bit, but you'll have to be careful with that because there's no gain controls on there. It will operate, and it does have that mode available for compatibility. But for the most part, you're going to want to try to match this to software that supports 32-bit float operation. I talked about that a lot in the previous video for the L6, so I'm not going to go into great detail on that right now. But this is how it appears as an audio interface, and then the outputs, this winds up being your two playbacks. So you've got USB 1, 2, and USB 3, 4 that wind up coming in on the higher channels there that you can assign to your DAW to play back through the mixer. And so we're going to take a look at an example digital audio workstation. This is the song setup page from Studio One. So for the audio setup, I've got the Zoom L6max set as the playback and the recording device. It's set at 48 kilohertz. In Studio One, you use song setup to set up the I/O. And so you go to the song setup page down here and then hit audio I/O setup here. And I've previously done that. So you've got the ability to set your inputs and outputs. Now these inputs are relative to Studio One. So coming into Studio One, you'll see it organized like this. The first two channels coming in will be your mix left and right. Now I typed this in because I set it up like this. It's not automatic. And then on the unit where you see 1, 2, 3, 4, those are your next channels, your main channels with the XLR inputs. And then you've got the stereo channels that I've assigned here. In the way that it works, though, is you just see these channels numbered out like this, and then it's up to you to assign it like this. The interesting thing here is that channels 5, starting here, which are stereo, can be used as two individual mono channels. And there's a button on the mixer that you can press on those two channels that will split it. They share the same volume control, but they wind up being independent mono channels, and they wind up, if you're recording to the unit, they wind up in separate WAV files. So you can also record that way using them as a stereo pair or individual mono channels if you prefer. All right, so we're going to take a look at the new version 2 of the Livetrak L6 editor. As I said earlier, this works for both the original L6 and the L6max, depending on which one you have connected. And I don't think it really adds a lot of features to the L6, but it does bring out the features that you'll find that are only on the L6max. One thing you do need to know is that you need to connect to the top USB connector if you're going to connect to a computer. If you connect to the side, that's for powering up the unit only. The date and time is appearing here. I don't think I can edit it on here. It's showing some details about the card, the type of battery, which we can now choose from the top. There's an auto power off. There's multi-track recorder mode or master only. This is where we set up USB mix minus. Mixer control via MIDI can be disabled if you want right here, but it's on. And then you've got some other things here that allow you to control the mixer via MIDI. And a bunch of stuff on the front panel, like all the levels and the buttons, and most of those things can be controlled through MIDI. There's a file transfer mode. If you go into the file transfer mode, it winds up acting as a disk. Then it will appear on your desktop. And so if I open this now, here are the sound pad files, and these are the quarter files. So that's how you get into that mode. You can't do anything else while you're in here, but you have up here, you can exit that mode. And when you exit it, it will eject this. And at least on Mac, it's probably a good idea to right-click on this thing and eject it first, because the Mac OS will complain about it if you don't do that. So we'll do that and then exit the file transfer mode. Now, everything else you see here is related to sound pads. Here's where you can load in different files. You can play back those files, and you can set the level for the file, and you can also set if they play as a one-shot, a loop, or hold. Hold meaning you have to hold the button down for it to keep playing. You can have a lot of fun with those load sounds in and out of there, but you load them in and out of there in the file transfer mode, but then you can set them up here. Another important thing about this L6 editor, you can see the version of it right here. This is the release version for the L6, but you can also see this is the release version of the Zoom L6max. And there was a firmware upgrade that came along during the course of I think around January of 2025 for the L6. And I did cover how to install a firmware update and what it did in the video on the L6. So here are some of my first impressions of the Zoom Livetrak L6max. I think it really builds on the strengths of the original unit, which is a great, interesting, compact form factor. Also a kind of a creative, innovative user interface that allows us to do multiple functions, and also keeping the price down for something that has all of these inputs where you can record all these tracks individually directly into the unit or as an audio interface. It's really quite unique at its price point. It really takes advantage of the digital technology to give you this 32-bit float for really good audio quality. I really think that they have added exactly what they needed to add on here. The ability to have high Z inputs was missing on the original one. The ability to have separate headphone outputs, which we now have with the sub out. We hit it here. And the ability to be a little more self-contained in the management of files without a computer. So you can do quite a bit more recording on here. Adding AI noise reduction is interesting. And then also just adding 2 more channels to it is also a very welcome addition. I like that they've added pads on all of the other inputs here. That is going to come in really handy and make this thing a lot more flexible. And they've done it all without really adding, unnecessary things to it. I think they've taken the feedback. I'm not sure if they had this in the plans all along, but it seems like they've taken feedback from the early users of the other one and really added a lot of really cool stuff to this new one. So I was a big fan of this one. Actually took it with me on some trips to do some recording and to use as an interface. And this one here looks like something I could possibly use as my main recording interface. At least I'm going to give that a try. And if that seems interesting, I'll make a video about that too, and you'll see that upcoming on the channel. Consider liking and subscribing so that you can see more coverage of this device and all kinds of other cool recording equipment that are things like mixers and microphones and headphones that you have come to know from this channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again real soon.